Okay. Hi, Lee Lewis. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, it looks like we're going to be talking about pirates today, yeah?
That's right.
And specifically female pirates.
Yes.
Now, I didn't
Six
know there
six
even
female pirates.
six female pirates. Okay. I didn't even know there were female pirates. So, these are actual pirates that from history, yeah?
Actual pirates from history. And that is a very common refrain of what I hear when I tell people that I've written this book. They say, wait a minute, there were female pirates? So you are definitely not alone in that.
Well, I have never seen any movies where female pirates were portrayed. Are there any?
There are a few. There are some documentaries out there. They're few and far between. There's some fiction out there that's where they take inspirations from some real life female pirates. But there's not much.
Well, how did you get interested in this?
So I always was uh, enthralled, intrigued, something by pirates. I mean, like most kids were. We always had Blackbeard books around when I was a kid, and at some point a few years ago, I read an article in a website called Women You Should Know about a pirate named Ching Shih. She was a Chinese pirate, and she commanded 18,000 ships and 80,000 men. So, just to put that in perspective, Blackbeard, considered to be the most famous pirate, he commanded 400 men, and Ching Shih commanded 80,000. So, the scale of
Wow.
her operation was really remarkable. And I thought it was just mind boggling that I didn't know who she was and that she wasn't a household name. So, time passed and I kept coming back to her and thinking about Ching Shi. She'd come up every once in a while. One day I was at the pool with my kids. They were taking turns walking the plank off of the diving board and yelling pirate speak to each other. And so when they finished, I asked them what pirates they were aware of, and they named a handful of them, and there were no women, and that really put me on course to deciding to write this book. So I started with Ching Shi, and I wrote her story, and National Geographic bought it, and together me along with my agent Ariane Sutu decided that we should make it a collection about diverse female pirates throughout the ages, and that's how Pirate Queens was born.
Wow, interesting. So, what time frame was she? How'd you pronounce her name?
Ching Shi. So she
Xing
was in the
Shi.
19th century, and she is the most recent of the pirates that are featured in this book. But the earliest is Artemisia of Caria, and she was the first female naval commander, and she was all the way back in 480 BC. So big time frame there of when these women lived, and there were female pirates kind of throughout the ages, but we chose these six to just kind of show the breadth and depth of what the pirate experience was for women.
Were the women doing the same thing essentially that men pirates were doing? Stealing treasure and commandeering ships and things? Yeah.
That's exactly what they were doing. Pirates are people who go and steal from other ships at sea, and that's what these pirates were doing as well. So some of them were doing the hand-to-hand combat. Anne Bonny is probably the best-known female pirate in the U.S. If someone has heard of a female pirate, it tends to be Anne Bonny, and she got into piracy because she was just kind of a ruffian. She liked the fight. So, the stories of Anne Bonny where she stabbed a servant girl when over a fork dispute when she was younger. She burned down her dad's plantation. She ran away with her first husband to the Bahamas, kind of the hub of piracy in her day, in the golden age of piracy, to become a pirate. And then when he became a snitch, telling on other pirates, she abandoned him for a life at sea. But really, she was just happy fighting the fight, taking treasure, no regrets, and living that life. So she was actually doing kind of the down and dirty work. Some of the others were more strategic or more involved in, kind of governmental issues, political posts, that type of thing. So another pirate, Sella, is a Norwegian pirate, and she was bitter because she had been overlooked for the position of power in Norway, and her brother was tapped to become king, and she just absolutely hated her brother. And so instead of staying home and being in this, figurehead position of being a pirate, of being a princess, she took to piracy. She took to the seas, and she too just wanted to be out there fighting the fight. And so she did. So the reasons why these women got into it were all different, but most of them did engage in hand-to-hand combat. Now, Ching Shih was really the exception to that. She had muscle. The person that was supposed to rise up and take the place of her deceased husband, she convinced him that he should not take that role, that she should be the brains behind the operation, and that he should be her muscle. And so she didn't have to get her hands dirty in the same way.
Pirates were freelance, weren't they? I mean, there wasn't like a pirate school that people went to learn how to be a pirate.
That's a good question. There's a couple of different ways to answer that. One is that Ching Shih, the way that she built such a huge empire, was that she quickly realized that there was a pirate that had one ship. Some pirates had 4 ships. Some had 2. These little kind of ragtag pirates that weren't aligned with a bigger fleet. And she took them all in and kind of gave them a home. And together they formed the Red Flag Fleet. And that's how she built such a huge group of people under her control. Freebooters are something that was different. They're kind of sanctioned pirates. So, at the time, they weren't considered criminals, but they were basically doing exactly the same thing. They were just going out and robbing at sea and giving their goods back to the government. And so it was kind of, overlooked. And, one man's crime is another man's. It was just one of those things where it was kind of the definition of whether they're a pirate or privateer. It was a very thin line there.
Are there still pirates today?
There are. I really did not do the deep dive there. I mean, every once in a while you'll turn on the news and see about the Somalian pirates, and there are certainly pirates today. It's a tricky thing when you're writing. Not that I want to glamorize any pirates, but when you have a little bit of distance historically, it's a little more palatable to look at the atrocities that have occurred than it is when they're actually happening right now at this point in time.
Well, I think Hollywood has definitely glamorized that with several movies. I mean, even Peter Pan, which was as, innocuous of a film as you could get, had a pirate character as a central character. And then there was the Johnny Depp series, Pirates of the Caribbean. And yeah, they're very romanticized.
For sure. And when I go into school visits and I ask kids what pirates they're aware of, Pirates of the Caribbean ends up being about the first thing that's named. So that in their minds it's almost, the lines between fact and fiction have become very blurred on that front.
Yeah, I'm trying to make a comparison to the question I asked you before about pirate school or if everybody was freelance. Would pirates of those days, be sort of akin to like a motorcycle club, like a bad motorcycle club, like maybe Hell's Angels or something like that?
Maybe. I think it was a lot worse than that because, for a lot of the pirates, they were, there's a pirate named Rachel Wall. She didn't make it into the book, but her whole thing was she had a crew. They basically parked their ship and made it look like it was shipwrecked, like they had crashed into the rocks. And she came up like a damsel in distress and stood on the ship and tried to hail down anyone she could to come help her. And then as soon as they did, they killed everybody on the ship and took all their treasure and sunk their boat. And then they did it all over again. And so, that seems a lot worse to me than Hell's Angels does.
Yeah,
and then many of them ended up having some ties to either royalty or some, Grace O'Malley is an Irish pirate. She was a chieftainess. Her family was kind of Irish royalty, and part of what they laid claim to was that they controlled the Irish seas also. And so for them, it was basically, they were just protecting their territory. The fact that they were taking the goods of anybody who dared sail in the open sea, um, didn't really come into play as something that would fill them with guilt or remorse or anything. It was just kind of part of the deal of maintaining your leadership.
So all of these female pirates, were their crew all men?
Mostly, so for sure, there were female pirates, and for sure the crew was largely male. We'll never really know what the gender breakdown was, because for one thing, women weren't allowed on ships. There's still that lore that women are bad luck on ships, and it comes all the way back to when they thought that women on ships would be angering the sea gods. And so, it was long lasting. It was pervasive, this idea that women were just bad luck. And so many of the women that we know of who were pirates disguised themselves as men to get on the ships. And, well, let's be honest, if they did a good job, we'll never hear of them, right? If they successfully passed themselves off as men, and never got caught doing so, as Anne Bonny and Mary Read did, we would never have heard their names because they would have been unremarkable.
No, it just seemed to me that if they were female and they weren't disguised as men, back in those days, I mean, misogyny was sort of the norm, and you would think
Sure.
that women would command no respect
Yeah.
from their crew.
I mean, it's really incredible to see some of the leadership positions that some of these pirates held. Ching Shih, were lucky enough to know about her code of laws because there was a captive on the boat, an English captive named Richard Glasspool, and he was held on her boat for 3 months. And so we have his record of what took place at that point. And so, one of the fascinating things about Ching Shih was that she put in place kind of a feminist code. And what it said was, historically, if you took females captive, they were treated like property. They had no rights. And Ching Shih said, okay, if you capture a woman, you have two choices. You can marry her and then remain faithful, or you can let her go. Those are the two choices, and anyone who disobeys is beheaded. I mean, it was just very simple. This is the way that it is on my ships. And again, we know that because we have an eyewitness to it who was a captive. And so she just had a very strict code that, with very strong rules, if you dared to break it. And so, she must have just absolutely been in command and respected and demanded the respect of the men on board, or else they wouldn't have followed it. I mean, certainly they could have killed her. And that just didn't happen.
So you said 80,000
Yeah.
she commanded? So she had the respect of 80,000 men at that
That's
point.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. And
Wow.
actually, in the end, she was so powerful that the government negotiated with her to convince her to stop, and she was ready to stop. And her negotiations included full pardons for her whole fleet, and they got to keep their bounty. So it was like pensions for them. Okay, we'll stop pirating. All of us will stop, but we need to keep getting paid. And they walked free. She lived a long life.
She must have been an incredible woman to have
Incredible.
that. Yeah, to have that kind of, I don't know, that kind of command over people.
More incredible when you know that she started as a prostitute and that her husband boarded the ship and was smitten with her and asked for her hand in marriage. She had no power, of course, and her negotiation for marrying him, in agreeing to marry him, was that they become equals in all things, and he agreed to it, and they became equals. And then when he died, she continued to just dramatically expand the empire.
Wow, amazing. So the book is called Pirate Queens, and this is the story of all the ones that we've been talking about?
That's right. Story of six real life female pirates.
Okay. Is the book out now?
It comes
You
out
said
tomorrow.
tomorrow, right. Okay, well, that's super. Do you have a website that you want to give out? We do have to
Sure,
wind down the interview.
I do. It's LeighLewisBooks.com, or you can find me on Twitter or Instagram at Leigh Writing.
Well, thanks so much for coming on and enlightening us. I bet there's going to be a lot of people like me who's going to say, I didn't even know there was female pirates.
That's right. I'm sure you're right.
Yeah, so this will be an educational video for everyone, I think. All right,
Right.
Leigh, thanks again.